I was standing in my driveway in Henderson, Nevada, staring at the certified letter in my hand when I realized my quiet suburban life was about to become a full-blown nightmare. The letter, printed on expensive cream-colored paper with embossed letterhead, informed me that the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association was filing a lawsuit against me for building code violations. Specifically, they claimed my newly constructed garage exceeded the maximum allowable height by 3 feet and demanded I tear it down within 30 days or face legal action and daily fines of $500. My name is Nathan Young, and I had lived in this neighborhood for 8 years without a single problem. I worked as an engineer for a renewable energy company, and I prided myself on following rules and regulations to the letter. When I decided to build a detached garage on my property 6 months ago, I spent weeks researching every applicable code, obtaining proper permits, and hiring licensed contractors. The idea that I had somehow violated building codes was not just insulting, but completely baffling. I walked back into my house where my girlfriend Sarah was making dinner. She took one look at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, turning down the heat on the stove. I handed her the letter without saying anything. She read it quickly, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief. "This is insane," she said. "You had that garage inspected 3 times during construction. The city approved everything." "I know," I replied, running my hand through my hair. "I have every permit, every approval document, every inspection certificate. This makes no sense." The letter was signed by Patricia Whitmore, the president of the Sunset Ridge HOA. I knew Patricia by reputation only. She was a woman in her early 50s who had moved into the neighborhood about 2 years ago and had immediately inserted herself into every aspect of community governance. Within 6 months, she had been elected HOA president, running on a platform of preserving property values and community standards. Since then, she had become infamous for her aggressive enforcement of even the most minor HOA rules. I had heard stories about Patricia at neighborhood gatherings. She had forced the Hendersons to repaint their house because the shade of beige was 2% darker than the approved color palette. She had fined the Rodriguezes for leaving their trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours after collection. She had even attempted to ban children from playing basketball in their own driveways because the sound of bouncing balls disturbed the peaceful atmosphere of the neighborhood. But this was different. This was not about minor aesthetic violations or noise complaints. This was a direct attack on a structure I had built legally and properly, and the financial implications were staggering. If I could not resolve this quickly, those daily fines would add up to $15,000 per month. The next morning, I called my attorney, Marcus Chen, who had helped me with the property purchase years ago. After explaining the situation, he asked me to send him all the documentation related to the garage construction. "This sounds like harassment," Marcus said after a long pause. "But we need to understand what their basis is for the claim. Do you have any idea where they are getting this 3-foot height violation?" "None whatsoever," I said. "The garage is exactly 22 feet tall at its highest point. The county code allows detached garages up to 25 feet. I am well within the limits. Send me everything," Marcus instructed. "Every permit, every plan, every inspection report. I will draft a response, but I want to schedule a meeting with the HOA board first. Sometimes these things can be resolved without litigation if we can show them they are wrong." I spent the rest of the day gathering documents. I pulled out the architectural plans that had been stamped and approved by the Henderson Building Department. I located all 3 inspection reports from the county inspector who had visited during foundation work, framing, and final completion. Each report clearly stated that the structure met all applicable building codes. I even found the original survey of my property that had been done when I purchased the house, showing property lines and setback requirements. As I organized everything, I became increasingly confident that this was simply a mistake. Perhaps Patricia had misread something or relied on incorrect information. Once we showed her the documentation, she would realize her error and drop the whole thing. I was frustrated by the hassle, but I tried to maintain perspective. People make mistakes. That optimism lasted exactly 3 days until Marcus called me with an update. "I spoke with Patricia Whitmore," he said, and I could hear the tension in his voice. "She is not backing down. She claims she has her own survey that shows your garage violates both height restrictions and setback requirements. She is insisting the lawsuit will proceed unless you agree to demolish the garage." "That is impossible," I said. "I have the official survey and all the permits." "How can she have a different survey?" "She would not give me details," Marcus replied. "She just kept saying that the HOA has the right to enforce community standards and that your garage is an eyesore that violates multiple codes." "Nathan, I have to be honest with you. This woman sounds unhinged." She was extremely hostile on the phone and refused to even look at the documentation I offered to provide. My frustration was rapidly turning into anger. I had done everything right, followed every rule, and now I was being accused of violations I had not committed by someone who refused to even examine the evidence. "What are our options?" I asked. "We can let them file the lawsuit and then prove them wrong in court," Marcus said. "Based on what you have sent me, I am confident we would win, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming. The other option is to try to force a meeting with the entire HOA board, not just Patricia. If we can get in front of reasonable people and present the facts, maybe we can stop this before it goes to court." I agreed to try the board meeting approach first. Marcus sent a formal request to the HOA board, citing provisions in the community bylaws that gave homeowners the right to address the board regarding disputes. Reluctantly, Patricia scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. The weekend before the meeting, I decided to do some investigation of my own. I walked around the neighborhood, looking at other garages and outbuildings. I wanted to see if there was something about my garage that stood out or if other structures were similar in size. What I discovered was enlightening and infuriating. Several houses in the neighborhood had garages that appeared to be the same height or even taller than mine. The Thompsons, who lived 4 houses down, had built a workshop that was clearly a substantial structure. The Martinez family had a large detached garage with a second-story storage space that had to be at least 30 feet tall. Yet none of these homeowners had been targeted by the HOA. I also noticed something else. My property was located on a corner lot at the intersection of Desert Bloom Drive and Cactus Ridge Road. It was one of the more visible properties in the neighborhood. My new garage, while completely standard in design, was certainly noticeable because of the location. On Sunday afternoon, my neighbor Tom stopped by. Tom was a retired police officer who had lived in Sunset Ridge since the development was first built 15 years ago. "I heard about your HOA trouble," he said, accepting the beer I offered him. "I wanted to give you some context about what you are dealing with." We sat on my back patio, and Tom told me the full story of Patricia Whitmore. She had moved to Henderson after a contentious divorce in California. According to neighborhood gossip, she had been involved in multiple disputes with neighbors at her previous residence, and had even been sued for making false complaints to code enforcement. When she arrived in Sunset Ridge, she had immediately begun attending every HOA meeting, documenting perceived violations, and pushing for stricter enforcement of rules. The problem is that most people in the neighborhood do not want to deal with the hassle of HOA politics, Tom explained. So when Patricia ran for president, only about 20% of homeowners even voted. She won with maybe 30 votes total. Now she acts like she has some kind of mandate to run everyone's lives. Why hasn't anyone challenged her? I asked. Tom shrugged. A few people have tried. The Millers fought her over a fence dispute last year. They eventually gave up and moved. It was just not worth the stress. Patricia has unlimited time and energy for this stuff. Most people have jobs and families and better things to do than engage in HOA warfare. So she is basically counting on people giving up, I said. Exactly, Tom confirmed. And the thing is, she does not even care if she is right or wrong. She just likes the power and the conflict. My advice: document everything. Do not communicate with her except through your lawyer, and be prepared for this to get ugly. Tom's warning proved prophetic. On Tuesday evening, I arrived at the community center with Marcus and a thick folder of documentation. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the 5 board members sat. Patricia was in the center, flanked by 2 other board members I did not recognize and 2 empty seats. We are missing 2 board members tonight, Patricia announced as the meeting began. But we have a quorum, so we can proceed. I noticed immediately that Patricia had a smug expression on her face. She was a thin woman with blonde hair cut in a severe bob, wearing a business suit that seemed far too formal for a neighborhood HOA meeting. She had a stack of papers in front of her and a laptop open. Marcus stood and introduced himself, then outlined our position. He explained that I had obtained all proper permits, passed all required inspections, and had documentation proving the garage met all applicable codes. He offered to provide copies of everything to the board. Patricia held up her hand to stop him. "That is all very interesting," she said in a condescending tone. "But the Henderson County building codes are only one set of regulations that apply here. Our HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which Mr. Young agreed to when he purchased his property, include additional restrictions on building heights and placement. According to our CCRs, detached structures on corner lots cannot exceed 19 feet in height and must be set back at least 25 feet from both street-facing property lines." Marcus and I exchanged glances. This was the first time anyone had mentioned HOA-specific restrictions beyond the county codes. "Can you show us where in the CCRs these restrictions are specified?" Marcus asked calmly. Patricia made a show of flipping through a binder. "Section 7, subsection D, paragraph 3, she said, reading from the page. "Corner lot restrictions. Quite clear." "I would like to see a copy of that section," Marcus said. Patricia had copies prepared, which immediately made me suspicious. She slid copies across the table to us. I read the text carefully. It did indeed specify height and setback restrictions for corner lots that were more stringent than county codes. But something about the document bothered me. The formatting looked different from the other CCR documents I had received when I bought the house. The font was slightly different and the page numbers seemed off. "When was this section added to the CCRs?" I asked. "It has always been part of the original CCRs from when the development was established," Patricia said quickly. "Then why was it not in the CCR documents I received at closing?" I pressed. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Perhaps your title company provided an incomplete set. That is not our responsibility." Marcus leaned over and whispered to me. I am going to need to verify this. Something is not right. The meeting continued with Patricia making increasingly dramatic statements about how my garage ruined the aesthetic of the neighborhood and set a dangerous precedent for other homeowners to violate community standards. The other board members mostly sat in silence, occasionally nodding along with Patricia's statements. When it came time for the board to vote on whether to proceed with the lawsuit, Patricia called for a show of hands. The 3 board members present voted unanimously to authorize legal action. The whole thing felt orchestrated and predetermined. As Marcus and I left the community center, I felt a mix of anger and determination. This was not about building codes or community standards. This was about control and intimidation. Over the next few days, Marcus did his homework. He requested a complete, certified copy of the original CCRs from the title company that had handled my property purchase. He also filed a public records request with Henderson County to obtain all amendments to the Sunset Ridge HOA governing documents. What he discovered was explosive. The section Patricia had cited at the board meeting had been added to the CCRs only 14 months ago, long after I had purchased my property. More importantly, the amendment had been passed without proper notification to homeowners and without the required supermajority vote. According to Nevada law and the HOA's own bylaws, major amendments to the CCRs required approval from at least 75% of homeowners. The amendment Patricia was relying on had been approved at a sparsely attended meeting with only 18 homeowners present, representing less than 10% of the community. This amendment is almost certainly invalid, Marcus told me over the phone. But here is the really interesting part. I looked at when it was passed. Do you know what happened right before that meeting? What? I asked. You applied for your building permit. I checked the dates. You submitted your permit application to the county on March 15th of last year. The HOA board meeting where they passed this amendment was on April 2nd. They saw you were planning to build a garage and rushed through an amendment specifically designed to block you. I felt my blood pressure rising. So this was targeted at me from the beginning. It looks that way, Marcus confirmed. And it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. I pulled the property records for every board member who voted for that amendment. 3 of them have detached garages or sheds on their own properties that would violate this exact same restriction. They are not enforcing it against themselves, only against you. This was selective enforcement, which was illegal under Nevada HOA law. Marcus filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit based on multiple grounds. The amendment was improperly passed. It was being selectively enforced. And even if it were valid, it could not be applied retroactively to prevent construction that had been properly permitted under the rules in effect at the time. But Patricia was not backing down. The HOA hired an aggressive attorney named Robert Carlson, who filed a response arguing that the amendment was valid and that I had constructive notice of all HOA rules regardless of when they were passed. They also claimed that my garage did violate even the original CCRs due to its height, though they offered no evidence for this claim. The legal battle dragged on for weeks. I was hemorrhaging money on attorneys' fees while trying to maintain my normal life and work. Sarah was incredibly supportive, but I could see the stress was affecting our relationship. We had been planning to get engaged that summer, but now all our money and energy were going into this absurd fight. 2 months into the litigation, Marcus came to me with a proposal. I think we need to hire a professional surveyor, he said. Someone who can definitively measure your garage and provide expert testimony that it meets all applicable codes. The HOA is claiming they have their own measurements showing violations, but they have not provided any credible evidence. If we have a licensed surveyor with accurate measurements, it will be impossible for them to maintain their position. I agreed immediately. Marcus recommended a surveying company called Precision Land Surveying, which had an excellent reputation and frequently provided expert testimony in legal cases. I contacted them and explained the situation. The lead surveyor, a man named David Martinez, came out to my property on a Thursday morning. He was a quiet, methodical professional who spent nearly 4 hours taking measurements, reviewing my original building plans and examining the county permits and inspection reports. "This is pretty straightforward," David said as he packed up his equipment. "I will have a full report for you within a week, but I can tell you right now that your garage is well within all applicable height restrictions. At its highest point, the peak of the roof measures 22 feet and 3 inches from grade. The Henderson County Code allows up to 25 feet for detached accessory structures. You have nearly 3 feet of clearance. What about the setbacks from the property lines?" I asked. "Also compliant," David assured me. "You are 32 feet from the Desert Bloom Drive property line and 29 feet from the Cactus Ridge Road line. The county requires 15 feet, and even if the HOA's attempted amendment were valid, which I understand is disputed, you would still be compliant with the 25-foot requirement they specified." I felt a wave of relief. Finally, I would have objective professional verification that I had done nothing wrong. "There is one more thing," David said, hesitating slightly. "I noticed something odd about the plot. Has anyone else surveyed your property recently?" "Not that I know of," I said. "Why?" "There are survey markers on your property that do not match the official survey from when you purchased the house. They are not professional markers, just wooden stakes with orange tape. But they are placed in locations that would make your garage appear closer to the property lines than it actually is. Did you put those there?" A chill ran down my spine. "No, I have never seen those before," David nodded slowly. "You might want to mention that to your attorney. If someone is placing false survey markers on your property to manufacture evidence of violations, that is a serious issue." After David left, I walked around my property and found the markers he was talking about. There were 3 wooden stakes with orange surveyor's tape tied to them, positioned in my yard between the garage and the street. If someone used these markers as reference points, it would indeed make the garage appear to be in violation of setback requirements. I immediately called Marcus and explained what I had found. He was silent for a long moment. "Do not touch those markers," he finally said. "I am going to contact the police. If someone is tampering with evidence or trespassing on your property to plant false evidence, that is criminal activity." The Henderson Police Department sent an officer to take a report. Officer Jennifer Walsh listened to my explanation, took photographs of the false markers, and noted their locations. She seemed skeptical at first that this was worth police involvement, but when I explained the context of the lawsuit and the potential financial implications, her demeanor changed. "So you are saying someone placed these markers to make it look like your building violates setback requirements, and you are being sued based on those alleged violations?" she asked. "That is what it looks like," I confirmed. "You have any idea who might have done this?" Officer Walsh asked. I hesitated. I had suspicions, but no proof. The HOA president has been very aggressive about this lawsuit, but I do not know if she would go this far. Officer Walsh finished her report and said she would forward it to a detective for follow-up investigation. I was not particularly optimistic that anything would come of it, but at least it was documented. A week later, David Martinez delivered his formal survey report. It was a comprehensive, 30-page document with detailed measurements, photographs, and technical analysis. The conclusion was unambiguous. My garage complied with all Henderson County building codes and setback requirements. It was exactly the evidence we needed. Marcus filed the survey report with the court and sent a copy to Robert Carlson, the HOA's attorney, along with a strongly worded letter demanding that the HOA dismiss the lawsuit immediately or face a countersuit for malicious prosecution, harassment, and attorney's fees. I expected some kind of response, but what happened next took me completely by surprise. 3 days after receiving our survey report, Robert Carlson withdrew as the HOA's attorney. He filed a motion to be removed from the case, which the judge granted. In his motion, he stated only that there was a fundamental disagreement with the client regarding litigation strategy and ethics. This was huge. For an attorney to withdraw from a case in the middle of litigation was unusual and typically meant the client was refusing to follow legal advice or was engaging in conduct the attorney could not ethically support. With no attorney, the HOA's case ground to a halt. The judge issued an order requiring the HOA to either retain new counsel within 30 days or the case would be dismissed with prejudice. I thought this might finally be the end of it. Surely, once Patricia realized her attorney had quit and we had overwhelming evidence on our side, she would give up. But I had underestimated her determination to win at any cost. 2 weeks later, I received notice that the HOA had retained a new attorney, a man named Greg Sullivan, who apparently specialized in representing homeowners associations in disputes. Greg filed a motion to continue the case and submitted what he claimed was a new survey commissioned by the HOA. When Marcus showed me the HOA's survey, I could not believe what I was seeing. It was allegedly prepared by a company called Southwest Survey Solutions and claimed that my garage was 23 feet tall at its highest point and violated setback requirements by being only 18 feet from the Cactus Ridge Road property line. "This is complete fiction," I said to Marcus. "How can 2 surveys of the same building come up with measurements that differ by several feet?" "That is exactly what I am wondering," Marcus replied. "I am going to do some research on this Southwest Survey Solutions company." What Marcus discovered was deeply troubling. Southwest Survey Solutions was a real company, but it had a history of complaints filed with the Nevada State Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors. Multiple property owners had accused them of producing inaccurate surveys, and the company's owner, a man named Richard Tompkins, had been disciplined twice for professional misconduct. More importantly, when Marcus contacted Southwest Survey Solutions directly and asked for verification of the survey report submitted by the HOA, the company denied ever conducting a survey of my property. Richard Tompkins said he had no record of any work done at my address and suggested that someone might have forged a survey report using his company's name. This was now clearly crossing the line into fraud. Marcus filed an emergency motion with the court, attaching a sworn affidavit from Richard Tompkins stating that the survey was not prepared by his company. He also requested an immediate hearing and asked the judge to compel the HOA to reveal who had actually prepared the fraudulent document. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I took the day off work and arrived at the Clark County Courthouse with Marcus. Patricia Whitmore was there with her new attorney, Greg Sullivan, who looked extremely uncomfortable. Judge Rachel Morrison, a no-nonsense jurist with 20 years of experience, called the case and immediately asked Greg Sullivan to explain the situation with the survey. Greg stammered for a moment before saying, Your Honor, I have only recently been retained in this matter. I am still gathering information about the survey report in question. Let me make this simple, Judge Morrison said, her tone sharp. The plaintiff submitted a survey report as evidence. The defendant is now claiming that report is fraudulent, and the surveying company whose name appears on the report has submitted an affidavit saying they never prepared it. Who gave you that survey report, Mr. Sullivan? It was provided to me by my client, the HOA board president, Patricia Whitmore, Greg admitted. Judge Morrison turned her attention to Patricia. Mrs. Whitmore, who prepared the survey report you provided to your attorney. Patricia stood, and I could see that she was flustered. Your Honor, I engaged a surveyor to conduct measurements of the property. I was given to understand that Southwest Survey Solutions had performed the work. Given to understand by whom? Judge Morrison pressed. I do not recall exactly, Patricia said, her confidence visibly crumbling. I may have used a subcontractor or consultant who arranged for the survey. Judge Morrison was clearly not satisfied with this answer. Mrs. Whitmore, you submitted a document to this court under penalty of perjury as evidence in a legal proceeding. That document appears to be fraudulent. I am going to give you one opportunity to explain, truthfully and completely, where you obtained that document. If you cannot or will not provide a satisfactory answer, I will be referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of possible criminal fraud. The courtroom was completely silent. Patricia looked at her attorney, who gave her a slight nod. She took a deep breath. Your Honor, I may have made a mistake, Patricia began. I was so concerned about the violations to community standards that I asked a friend who has some surveying experience to take some measurements. I may have presented those measurements in a more official format than was appropriate. Judge Morrison's expression darkened. You asked an unlicensed person to take measurements, and then you created a fake survey report to make it appear as though a professional surveying company had verified your claims. I did not intend to deceive anyone, Patricia protested weakly. I was simply trying to document the violations. What violations? Judge Morrison asked pointedly. The defendant has submitted a certified survey from a licensed professional surveyor showing full compliance with all applicable codes. Do you have any actual evidence, any at all, that contradicts that survey? Patricia had no response. Judge Morrison shook her head in disgust. This case is dismissed with prejudice, the judge declared. Furthermore, I am awarding attorney's fees and costs to the defendant, Mrs. Whitmore. You will personally be responsible for reimbursing Mr. Young for the legal expenses he has incurred defending against this baseless lawsuit. I am also referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of possible criminal fraud and to the Nevada Real Estate Division for investigation of HOA governance violations. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. I felt a mixture of relief and vindication wash over me. Marcus shook my hand and congratulated me, but warned that the fight was not completely over. We still need to collect on the attorney's fees award, he said. And Patricia can still appeal, though I doubt any appellate court would overturn this decision given the facts. Over the next few weeks, the story of what happened spread through the neighborhood. Many homeowners who had been quietly intimidated by Patricia for years suddenly found their voices. A petition began circulating to remove Patricia from the HOA board and to recall the entire board for allowing her to pursue such an obviously frivolous lawsuit using HOA funds. The Henderson Police Department, following up on the report about the false survey markers, opened an investigation. Detective Mike Brennan contacted me for an interview and asked detailed questions about the timeline of events and the markers that had been placed on my property. "We are looking at possible charges of criminal trespass, tampering with evidence and fraud," Detective Brennan told me. "The district attorney is also reviewing the case based on the judge's referral from your civil case." About 6 weeks after the court hearing, I received a call from Detective Brennan. "I wanted to give you an update," he said. "We have completed our investigation, and the DA has decided to file charges against Patricia Whitmore. She is being charged with attempted fraud and filing false documents in a legal proceeding. Both are felonies under Nevada law." I was stunned. I had hoped for some kind of accountability, but I had not expected criminal charges. "What happens now?" I asked. "She will be arraigned next week," Detective Brennan explained. "Given that these are non-violent offenses and she has no prior criminal record, she will likely be released on her own recognizance pending trial. But if she is convicted, she could face jail time and substantial fines." The news of Patricia's arrest spread through Sunset Ridge like wildfire. The local newspaper, the Henderson Herald, ran a story about the case under the headline, "HOA President Faces Fraud Charges Over False Building Violation Claims." The article detailed the entire saga and included comments from several other homeowners who had been targeted by Patricia's enforcement campaigns. The fallout was swift. Within days of the article's publication, the HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. She also resigned from the board entirely, likely on the advice of her criminal defense attorney. A special election was held to fill the board vacancies, and several reasonable, level-headed homeowners stepped up to serve. Tom, my retired police officer neighbor, was elected president, and he immediately began implementing reforms to prevent future abuses of power. Meanwhile, Marcus worked on collecting the attorney's fees awarded by the court. The total came to $47,000, which included his fees, the cost of the surveyor's report, filing fees, and other litigation expenses. Patricia initially refused to pay, but when Marcus threatened to garnish her wages and place a lien on her property, she agreed to a payment plan. The criminal case moved forward slowly, as these things typically do. Patricia's attorney negotiated with the district attorney and eventually reached a plea agreement. In exchange for pleading guilty to one count of filing false documents, the fraud charge was dropped. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to me for a portion of my legal expenses. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a stern lecture about the abuse of authority and the serious consequences of using the legal system to pursue personal vendettas. Patricia stood silently, looking diminished and defeated, a far cry from the aggressive, self-righteous person who had started this whole mess. As for me, life gradually returned to normal. The stress of the lawsuit had taken a toll, but Sarah and I got through it together. That fall, I proposed to her on the back patio overlooking the garage that had caused so much trouble. She said yes. The new HOA board, under Tom's leadership, proved to be reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement actions. They revised the CCRs to remove ambiguous provisions and implemented clear procedures for how violations would be handled, including requirements for independent verification before legal action could be taken. Several homeowners who had been previously targeted by Patricia came forward with their own stories. The Millers, who had moved away after their fence dispute, heard about the case and contacted Marcus about potentially filing their own lawsuit against Patricia for harassment. Others simply felt vindicated knowing that her reign of terror had finally ended. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after the court case had concluded, I was in my garage working on a woodworking project when Tom stopped by. "Got a minute?" he asked. We walked over to my driveway, and Tom pulled out a folder. "The board wanted me to give you this," he said, handing it to me. "It is a formal letter of apology from the HOA for what happened. We also wanted to reimburse you for some of your expenses that Patricia did not cover." Inside the folder was a check for $10,000 and a letter signed by all 5 board members expressing regret for the lawsuit and thanking me for standing up against the abuse of power. "You did not have to do this," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Yes, we did," Tom replied. What Patricia did was not just wrong. It was a betrayal of what an HOA is supposed to be. We are supposed to protect property values and maintain community standards, not target individual homeowners with personal vendettas. You stood your ground when a lot of people would have just torn down the garage to avoid the hassle. That took courage, and it made this neighborhood better. As I stood there holding the letter, I reflected on everything that had happened. The experience had been stressful, expensive, and at times overwhelming. But it had also taught me important lessons about standing up for what is right, about the importance of documentation and evidence, and about the value of having good people in positions of authority. My garage still stands exactly as it was built, a testament to the fact that I had done everything correctly from the beginning. Every time I look at it, I remember the battle I fought and won, not just for myself, but for the principle that homeowners deserve to be treated fairly and honestly by the associations that are supposed to serve them. The legal system, for all its flaws and inefficiencies, had ultimately worked the way it was supposed to. The truth came out, justice was served, and someone who abused her authority faced real consequences. In a world where it often feels like powerful people can get away with anything, that outcome felt deeply satisfying. I never saw Patricia Whitmore again after the sentencing hearing. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she eventually moved away from Henderson, possibly to avoid the shame and notoriety of what had happened. I did not take any pleasure in her downfall, but I felt no sympathy either. She had made her choices, and she had to live with the consequences. The experience changed how I viewed community involvement and governance. I became more active in HOA meetings, not because I enjoyed the bureaucracy, but because I understood how important it was to have engaged homeowners preventing abuses of power. Sarah and I both joined various neighborhood committees, and we worked to create a culture where people felt comfortable raising concerns without fear of retaliation. The following spring, we got married in a small ceremony in my backyard. Friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate, and I gave a toast thanking everyone for their support during the difficult year we had endured. Standing there surrounded by people who had become more than just neighbors, who had become genuine friends and allies, I felt incredibly fortunate. Life moved forward in the way it always does. I continued my work as an engineer. Sarah advanced in her career as a teacher, and we began planning for the future we wanted to build together. The garage became exactly what I had intended it to be, a workshop where I could pursue my hobbies and a storage space for all the equipment and tools that cluttered our lives. But more than that, the garage became a symbol. To me, it represented the importance of doing things right, of following proper procedures, and of standing firm when you know you are in the right. To the neighborhood, it became a reminder of what can happen when one person abuses authority, and what can be accomplished when people stand together against that abuse. Years later, when we had children and they asked why our garage was so important to me, I told them the full story. I explained how their father had been accused of something he did not do, how he had fought back with evidence and truth, and how justice had prevailed. I wanted them to understand that standing up for yourself is not always easy, but it is always worth it. The story of the HOA lawsuit became something of a local legend in Henderson. Real estate agents mentioned it when showing houses in Sunset Ridge, usually as a cautionary tale about bad HOA governance, but also as reassurance that the community had reformed and improved. The case was even cited in a Nevada state legislative hearing about HOA reform, used as an example of why stronger oversight and accountability measures were needed. For my part, I tried not to dwell on the negative aspects of what had happened. Yes, it had been stressful and expensive. Yes, it had consumed months of my life and caused significant anxiety. But it had also brought unexpected positives. I had developed a closer relationship with many of my neighbors. I had learned to be a more effective advocate for myself. And I had gained confidence in my ability to face challenges and overcome them. Marcus Chen, my attorney, used the case as a teaching example for other lawyers. He spoke at legal conferences about the importance of thorough documentation and the dangers of HOA overreach. He told me that several other homeowners had contacted him after hearing about my case, seeking help with their own HOA disputes. In at least 3 instances, he was able to resolve those disputes simply by sending a letter citing my case and threatening similar legal action if the HOA did not back down. The professional surveyor, David Martinez, also benefited from the publicity. His expert testimony and the thoroughness of his survey report earned him recognition in his industry. He received several new clients who specifically requested his services because of his work on my case. When I bumped into him at a local coffee shop about a year after everything concluded, he thanked me for the business and joked that he should send Patricia Whitmore a referral fee. The Henderson Building Department even made some changes based on what happened. They implemented a new policy requiring that homeowners receive written confirmation at the time of final inspection that their projects fully comply with all applicable codes. This was designed to provide additional protection against baseless accusations of violations after construction was complete. Tom, as the new HOA president, proved to be everything Patricia was not. He was reasonable, transparent, and focused on actually improving the community rather than enforcing rules for the sake of power. Under his leadership, the HOA organized neighborhood events, maintained common areas, and handled legitimate concerns without the heavy-handed tactics that had characterized Patricia's tenure. One of Tom's first actions as president was to conduct an audit of HOA finances. What he discovered was disturbing but not entirely surprising. During Patricia's time as president, she had spent HOA funds liberally on her enforcement campaigns, including hiring attorneys to send threatening letters to homeowners over minor violations. The lawsuit against me alone had cost the HOA nearly $60,000 in legal fees before her attorney withdrew from the case. Tom presented these findings to the membership and apologized for the waste of community funds. He implemented new financial controls requiring board approval for any legal expenses over $5,000 and requiring that homeowners be given opportunities to resolve alleged violations before legal action was taken. The reforms were popular with the vast majority of homeowners, and attendance at HOA meetings increased dramatically. People who had previously avoided involvement out of fear of Patricia's retaliation now felt comfortable participating in community governance. The neighborhood felt more cohesive and friendly than it had in years. I occasionally wondered what Patricia was doing and whether she had learned anything from the experience. Part of me hoped that the consequences she faced had led to some self-reflection and personal growth. But I also recognized that some people are so invested in their own narratives that they never truly accept responsibility for their actions. Either way, she was no longer my problem or my concern. The garage itself continued to serve me well. I spent countless hours in there working on various projects, from building furniture to repairing household items to simply tinkering with tools and equipment. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the stresses of daily life and focus on creating something with my own hands. Sarah sometimes joked that I loved the garage more than any other part of our property, and she was not entirely wrong. But it was not really about the building itself. It was about what the building represented: my right to make reasonable improvements to my own property, my ability to stand up against unjust accusations, and my refusal to be bullied into submission by someone who abused their authority. As the years passed, the intensity of the emotions surrounding the lawsuit faded, but the lessons remained. I became someone people in the neighborhood came to for advice when they had disputes with the HOA or other authorities. I was always happy to share my experience and encourage people to document everything, seek professional help when needed, and never assume that someone in authority is automatically right. The case also affected how I approached my professional life. As an engineer, I had always been detail-oriented and careful about following specifications and codes. But after experiencing firsthand how baseless accusations could threaten something I had built correctly, I became even more meticulous. I kept better records, I documented decisions more thoroughly, and I made sure that everyone I worked with understood the importance of compliance and verification. Looking back on everything that happened, I could honestly say that while I would not want to go through it again, I did not regret how things turned out. The truth had prevailed, justice had been served, and my community was better for it. The garage still stood as proof that I had been right all along, and every time I walked past it, I felt a quiet sense of pride and vindication. The story of the HOA lawsuit became part of our family history, a tale we would tell at gatherings and pass down to future generations. It was a reminder that ordinary people facing unfair treatment can fight back and win if they have courage, evidence, and determination. It was proof that the system, despite its flaws, can still deliver justice when good people refuse to give up. Nathan Young had faced down Patricia Whitmore and her fraudulent claims, and he had emerged victorious. My name, my reputation, and my property had all been vindicated. The garage would stand for decades to come, exactly 22 feet and 3 inches tall at its highest point, fully compliant with every applicable code, a monument to the principle that truth and evidence will always defeat lies and intimidation.